The topic of this session is there are very few new ideas in this world. So, when we are talking about innovation and creativity, please remember there are very few new ideas in this world. Now, I'll have to give you a brief background. So, one day when I walked into the office of my PhD supervisor at the University of Texas at Austin, and this would be in early 1990s, 92 or 93, I found that his room was filled to the brim with the research papers and journals. So it appeared because of he was quite famous in the industry. So all the journals would be sending him copies, and those copies were stacked. So when I entered his room, there was no place for me to sit, and it was 3 p.m., the customary time for my meeting, monthly meeting with my supervisor. So what he did was that he said, "Sorry, Mr. Hyder, let me create a space for you." He picked up a bundle of journals that were lying over there and placed them somewhere else. This is what he did. And while pointing out those stacks and stacks of journals everywhere spread in his room, he mentioned, he pointed towards them and he mentioned, "Mr. Hyder, there are very few new ideas in all these journals, papers. It's mostly a rehashing of the same concept using different terms, different context, and different places and different products." Now, I had to learn it the hard way. I will give you two smaller examples. One may require a bit more. Sometime later, I think it will require a full talk. Let me give you an example of what we call supply chain management today. That's an in term today, supply chain management. But as I look at the supply chain management issues, I am reminded of Sam Walton, the founder of Walmart. He wrote a book before he died in 1992. So before he died, he, along with one writer, he sat down and he reminisced about his past and how this fantastic organization like Walmart came into being, which in 1992 was among the biggest corporations in USA. So while reading his book, and the name of that book is is Made in America by Sam Walton, and in that, when he was describing 1960s of how he constructed, he sat down with his IT people and established a mechanism through which he could monitor the inventory of the supplier. The problem that he was solving was that as Walmart has large number of suppliers, so when we are sending them purchase orders, often the suppliers are unable to provide the deliveries on time, just in time for their stores. So he wanted to set up a system whereby he could look into the inventory of the supplier before ordering, and could also look at the lead time of the supplier so that he can order in a manner so that when those things would be delivered in his store. Let me assure you that at least in Pakistan, this level of automation is not even available with many of the big organizations and factories and big stores in Pakistan, whereby you have the capacity to log into the system of the supplier, and And actually, it was not logging in. At that time, there was no internet. So you couldn't log into the system, some other system. So it was all done using messages over rickety telecommunication networks and telephonic connections, where a message will go to the supplier system, and from there it will come out the result of what the inventory is, and based upon that inventory it will go back. Of course, there is a lot of detail. Now, this is supply chain management of today, 2020, and I'm talking about 1960s, what there. But at that time, this thing was known, and here I come back to my original point of there are very few new ideas in this world. At that time, this was known as inventory control. So I wanted to reduce my inventory, and for that, I need the deliveries just in time. I don't want to order things too much in advance, and I don't want to hog my inventory. So that was known as inventory control. And then this thing, when it connected with the sales and the purchase systems, inventory, when it got connected with sales and purchase system, began to be called as manufacturing, MRP, manufacturing resource planning, MRP. And this MRP1 actually then scheduled the delivery orders and the purchase orders and the factory orders and the shop orders in such a way so that all of this can be connected together. And it was an intricate system, and it was quite difficult. So it used to be called an MRP. And when this MRP also got connected with other system, it was known as MRP2, where it got connected with the HR and the others, so that it can give a complete breakdown, not only a manufacturing background, but also other things. So it became known as MRP2, and later on it became an ERP. And today what we are seeing is the supply chain management. The concepts are same. I think the same thing that Sam Walton has described in 1960s, that's what we are trying to do today, and we are calling it supply chain management. So previously the manufacturing director manufacturing and directors material procurement, they are now being called as director supply chain, and they are doing the same thing. So it's just a fancy word. So the inventory control changing its name to MRP, changing its name to MRP2, changing its name to ERP, and the ERP changing its name to the supply chain management. I'll give you another example. Now, this is slightly more technical example. So in 1980s, we used to have what was known as distributed computing, where different computers were there and they were all connected together. And how do you do computing over different computers, so as to say. And then the network came into being, and the networks, the computers were working through networks, through messages that were exchanged. And this distributed computing then became parallel computing when it became, those networks became accessible, and maybe you have multiple processors on the same system. And then this problem of parallel processing and parallel computers then has changed its name over the period to grid computing, and from grid computing it has come to the cloud computing, where the idea is same. And the idea is simply, how do you hide the implementation details from the upper levels of concern? So this is beyond the scope of this, because I will get into more technical. But while going over some of the papers of distributed computing in 1980s, and I did some research at that time, and recently a student of mine was working on grid computing and cloud computing, and the issues of scheduling, issues of scheduling, those issues are the same that I found way back 40 years ago. So it is coming again. There are very few new ideas in the world. We don't have the patience. We only look at the last 5-year papers. We don't go back and see what was done 30 years ago or 40 years ago to learn from those experiences and do it again. So for instance, again, today when I see the HTML, It reminds me of what was the name? Soft. The word perfect and others. Actually, before word perfect there was another system. And when I see all of that, tags and backslashes and backslash bf and others, I get reminded about 1980s. So we are back into the same era now. So the same concepts keep on coming back again. So Python is now very, very popular. So at that time there used to be interpreter languages. So BASIC, on which I started learning programming, was an interpreter language, and then all the compilers came, and now we have again gone back to the interpreter languages, and Python is one example. So there are very few new ideas, and we keep on rediscovering the same ideas again and again in different contexts, and think that they are new ideas. So this is the end of part 2.